Ace Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another preface before we get into our show. Today's food for thought given to us by Alan Jenkins from Beware and Warning, another fantastic podcast held on Ace Podcast Network, where every other week they'll read a different choose-your-own adventure book and see if they can make it through the dangers, intrigue, and butt jokes to the end. They're a fun show. I rather enjoy them, so I think you should definitely give them a listen, give them a try. They might be a cup of tea. Their fun fact for us is, did you know there is more geological time between the Stegosaurus and the T-Rex than there is between the T-Rex and us humans? That's something to ponder at the dinner table and share with your friends and family. Anyway, today's episode, we're joined by Brooke Richards, a conservation zoologist looking into the offset policy. It's something I'm sure many are not very aware of. However, the offset policy is a policy for whenever there is industry or construction that disturbs or removes protected natural habitats. That organization is responsible for providing financial or alternative offsets to mitigate or mediate the damage they do. You'll learn a lot more as you listen to the show, and let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Brooke. I did my research recently on environmental offsets in Western Australia, looking specifically at Carnaby's Cockatoo and using the cockatoo as a case study. I finished 2 weeks ago.
So congratulations.
Thank you. I'm relaxing at the moment.
So you studied zoology, right? So could you tell us and the listeners a little bit about zoology and what is it the study of?
Okay. It's basically the scientific study of animals. Yeah. So you're looking at how they interact with their environment and how they function, their structure, their behaviour, all that sort of thing. Yeah. Is it just terrestrial based, or do you get aquatic based, marine based animals? It's mostly terrestrial. Yeah. There is another major at UWA that does marine biology. There were some examples of marine based things, but mostly terrestrial. Awesome. And another thing, could you explain to us the difference between zoology and ecology? Like, is there a difference between them? Ecology falls under zoology. Zoology is the main umbrella term, and then there's ecology and all these other different... Okay, so it's like a sub-discipline almost. Yeah. So what got you into zoology? Just the fact that I love animals. Just the fact that you're one of the most common incentives for most people in zoology, I suppose. Basically. I always knew that I didn't want to do something boring for a living, and I was like, what do I like? I love animals. All right, there we go. I'll do my degree in that. Did you have any ideas of your potential outcome, like where you wanted to be post-degree? Did you know you want to go into research, or do you want to work, I don't know, in a zoo? Which would be amazing. Yeah, well, I did some work experience at the zoo. That was pretty fun. Awesome. But I never really had a plan post-uni. I sort of did honours to see if I liked research. That was something I wanted to do. So upon finishing, I'm sort of tossing up PhD or not. So did you enjoy doing the research then? I did. I loved learning from my supervisors. They were just fantastic. Yeah. Something, that you really want to you aspire to, because they're just really knowledgeable. And all. Your research involved cockatoos itself mostly as a topic. Yeah. For people that aren't Australian, could you explain to us what the cockatoo is? In Western Australia, we have 3 species of black cockatoo. They are the white-tailed black cockatoos, red-tailed black cockatoos. Yep. My study species was Carnaby's Cockatoo, and that's an endemic species to the southwest of Western Australia. They are very charismatic. They're quite big birds, and they're currently facing some pretty severe conservation issues, population decline, and being quite a charismatic species, they are well known in the community and everything, so it's quite important to... the ones that wake you up in the morning just screeching? Pretty much. Yeah, you'll walk under their feed trees and you'll see just destroyed leaves, destroyed conky nuts and everything, and you can tell that's when they've been because it's just a litter of trail of destruction.
Yeah. How big would you say a cockatoo is, just scale-wise?
Maybe like 40 centimetres tall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quite large birds.
Quite large birds.
Yeah.
I've had a few, we've got a gum tree out in our garden, and we've had a few black ones. Just in the morning, I've just heard this screeching over and over. I come out and just like this big thump and just eating through a branch.
Basically.
Great, guys.
Yeah. I mean, they can be considered a pest because of that as well, but they're beautiful species. I wouldn't, consider them a pest myself, but I think I'm a bit biased.
When you say they're endemic, do you mean they only live in the southwest of Western Australia?
Yeah, exactly. So they're only found in this area.
Okay.
So sort of a responsibility to protect them. Yeah. Because they're not found anywhere else.
So what's the threats that you've said that are facing them?
The primary one is habitat loss.
Okay.
They feed on the Swan Coastal Plain, which is sort of Perth, basically.
Okay.
And then they breed in the wheat belt areas, so further away from Perth, sort of along the edges of the Swan Coastal Plain.
So how far from their feed? So they feed on the coast, and how far inland do they travel to breed? I suppose is it a couple of K, or is it a bit further?
Hours. I would say. Yeah. They're quite funny because they only roost and breed in specific areas. They're quite a picky species because they need hollows in trees that have take hundreds of years to form in these trees, and they won't breed somewhere that isn't in close proximity to feeding habitat around that. It's just they're very specific.
They're almost traditional. They just follow what their ancestors have done. They're not willing to derive or move away from.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Awesome. So could you tell us what exactly did you do for your research then?
My research was looking at environmental offsets. So in Western Australia specifically.
Okay.
Currently, an environmental offset.
Yeah, please.
Is where it's an environmental management technique. So developers come in and they clear a bit of bushland, and as part of sort of the approval that they have to clear that area, they have to compensate for what was cleared, and they can protect another area, or they replace the habitat that was lost, or they fund research and all that sort of thing.
So it's kind of it is a compensation program to, I suppose, fund, I suppose, conservation, but also prevent other habitat loss.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's a government-funded scheme, I suppose?
It's...
Or international?
There's policy governing offset use.
Yeah.
It's funded by the developers just because it's something they have to do as part of their approval for a development. Whatever compensation action they do, it has to compensate directly for what was lost in the first place. So the reason why I looked at Carnaby's Cockatoo is because there's lots of developments that have cleared Carnaby's Cockatoo habitat, so they've had to replace Carnaby's Cockatoo habitat. And basically my research was looking at how effective that's been, and if they're achieving their goal of sort of a neutral relationship between development and conservation.
The development that's going on causing the habitat loss, is that mostly commercial based, or is that government funding housing, or is that
lots of things?
Just almost everything down there.
Yeah, lots of mining. Fiona Stanley Hospital cleared a lot of Carnaby's Cockatoo habitat, so they had some big offsets there, focusing on Carnaby's Cockatoo.
So when they clear an area out that's affecting, I suppose, you've got this giant rural landscape, for example, that's home to these cockatoos and various other indigenous animals. When they clear it out, are they only kind of offset or subsidise the conservation methods for a select species, or do they kind of go, okay, we got rid of loads of bushland, so we're going to protect some bushland, or is it just, we got rid of this bushland, this made this endemic species kind of struggle and stressed, so we're going to focus our money and efforts on that one? It
has to be the exact sort of species that was affected in the first place.
Okay. Which
can be quite difficult to quantify. But if it's specifically like endangered species or heritage listed areas, they must focus on those.
Yeah. The form of offset that the commercial industry use, is it traditionally one method? Do they kind of prefer to conservate an area, or do they prefer to produce another area, or do they prefer to fund a certain area?
There's the policies. There's two policies that govern offset use. There's the federal policy and the state policy. Mm-hmm. And when you look at those policies, there's different ways to offset. Yeah. So like you're saying, you can do protect an existing habitat, you can rehabilitate or restore or revegetate another, like an area, which is effectively replacing the habitat. Yeah. Or you can fund education, fund research, specifically looking at the impacted matter.
So it's retaining almost an equilibrium in nature.
Basically.
That's not too bad. Like, I mean, you kind of see and hear about all these huge developments destroying land masses. Well, not necessarily land masses, but
habitat, very important habitat.
And I mean, does it take these animals, especially the cockatoos in your regard, does it take them a long time to repopulate in these new areas?
Well, that's the sort of thing that's not really known. My study was one of the first studies, specifically looking at Carnaby cockatoo to see how they are working. We don't really know. So with Banksia woodland is one of the primary sources of feeding habitat for Carnaby cockatoo, and growing that habitat and restoring that habitat takes a long time. It's difficult, takes a long time. So there's quite a time lag in between the time that an area is cleared and the time that rehabilitated area is usable for the birds, which can be quite, it's a bit sus because the Carnabys are having to survive on less habitat before the new habitat is ready. So it
can be quite stressful for them.
Yeah.
So what did you find from your work itself? Did you find out that they were quite stressed and not colonised in these new areas?
I didn't really look at that. I was sort of, what I did find was looking at what types of offsets have been applied. I found that land protection offsets were the most common, which means that they're not replacing habitat, they're only protecting existing habitat. So really, there is still a net loss of habitat from the clearing and from development and everything. And if you look at the literature, the main goal of an offset should be to have an equilibrium between development and conservation. And my research suggests that perhaps maybe we're not achieving that equilibrium.
Yeah, so they're more financially protecting an area, I suppose, rather than, and which still creates a net loss.
Yeah.
Which doesn't sound very fair or correct, I suppose, for conservational purposes.
Yeah, basically. So I sort of, in my research, suggested areas for improvement, like potential changes in policy, perhaps.
Where's the next step for this research? Are you going to carry this on, or do you happen to know or can you recommend a next step for this kind of research?
I haven't really considered keeping going in it. For Western Australia specifically, and for Carnaby cockatoo, there isn't really a next step. It might take many years if any of my recommendations are even acted upon. There wouldn't be a next step for quite a long time. But a potential next step would be looking at the restoration and revegetation, rehabilitation offsets and seeing if they are effective or not for conserving Carnaby cockatoos. It is quite an upcoming field, offsets. There's lots of literature from the eastern states. It's also an international management technique. So the IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, also has an offset policy, and they hope to use that policy internationally, use it as a global template.
I don't know if many people have heard of it, but there's a term ecological services or ecosystem services, where natural areas provide a service and they evaluate that service and provide a cost. By ecological services, I'm referring to, for example, mangroves sitting by the coast and preventing erosion. Can offsets be, the technique of using financial protected restoration offsets be used to improve or restore ecological services in the future?
Oh, yeah. Offsets, conservation management techniques, environmental management techniques. You could definitely incorporate restoration of ecological services. I mean, that's something you should probably be aiming for anyway, particularly in restoration offsets or just restoration work. You can plant trees in an area, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be, it doesn't mean it's going to have the ecological services it once had. You know, it might not have the pollinators within the planted trees. It's going to keep it going into the future, that sort of thing. So I think it could be.
It could be, but it still kind of has, there's a lot more variables to
there's a lot of research that needs to be done.
During your work, did you spend a lot of time with these birds? Did you get a lot of field work in?
No, I didn't. It wasn't a fieldwork based study. It was only a desktop study. Mm-hmm. So there's an environmental offsets register. All my data was text data that I've reports and websites. And
just rolling your eyes and thinking about it.
It hurt. But it was worth it.
How long did you end up spending looking at these text documents?
A couple of months. Oh, it was fine. Someone had to do
it. Did you find any limitations during your research? Was there, I suppose, missing data or missing information?
Yeah, definitely. Relying on online data definitely meant that if it wasn't there, then I couldn't use it. One of the things offset policy was very important as part of the offset process was it needed to be transparent. Mm-hmm. So basically it meant that all documents needed to be publicly available. Anyone who wanted to access the documents and see what was happening with offsets, they could. Yeah. The primary documents were available, but a lot of secondary documents which sort of had details about how they restored an area or timescales, timelines, who was responsible, that was missing. So that was definitely a limitation, and that sort of narrowed the scope of my study because of that. So
you weren't able to get a copy of the documents at all?
A lot I was, but some that I just couldn't find online. So that
happens.
Yeah, so that's something that I said in my recommendations, that it needs to be more transparent.
With your work, you said you're not too sure whether you're going to do a PhD, you're kind of tossing up. Yeah. Do you have an idea? Are you leaning towards more further research? And if you do, are you going to go into more of a field-based study, dealing with the animals hands-on or dealing with concepts hands-on? Yeah.
Maybe not offsets, but definitely I found with my uni degree it was very, lots of lectures, not much hands-on sort of practical experience. Yeah. I mean, there was some, but a lot of stuff to get skills you would have to do volunteering and externally in your own time. Yeah. So I think that would be the next step for me, just to get that practical experience.
Do you happen to have any take-home notes for any of the listeners, like conservation things that you can recommend people to do, make small changes in their lives? Or do you have any foundations you'd like to promote or anything like that?
I think even though I've said stuff about offsets, but even though that it might not be as good as it can be, it's better than nothing occurring. I mean, clearing occurred in the past completely unregulated, but now there is some sort of regulation involved, and I think it's important to remember that offsets are better than nothing.
So the silver lining is at least something is being done, which is more than we can say for histories.
Yeah, exactly.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
That fun question that I never got actually an answer from you. Mm-hmm. If there was an apocalyptic scenario to derive from zoology as a whole thing, taken from any concept of zoology, could you think of a sci-fi based apocalyptic scenario or realistically based scenario that could occur?
Well, sort of more of a conservation, I suppose, of zoology as well, but what happens if all the bees die? We are screwed, basically, because no pollination, no food for anybody. We're all just gonna...
So what do the bees do for us?
They pollinate plants, and plants can't produce food most of the time without being pollinated. So fruit, vegetables, everything needs to be pollinated by bees. And without them, you're not going to have crops or farming or anything like that.
So it's a really good example of an ecological service that's taken for granted.
Yeah, basically.
And there's a lot of talk at the moment about bees being endangered or...
which is really worrying.
Yeah, well, could you provide just, if you happen to know... what is the current research in that? Are they saying that all bees are endangered, certain species? and if the species that are endangered, are they critical?
I'm not 100% certain. It's not something I've
That's
researched, but I know that Western Australia specifically has a very good remaining population of bees. Around the world, it's not that great because there's lots of disease and everything in bee populations. I think Western Australia is a very important place to be doing research into bees, and they are doing some. I'm not exactly sure where they're at. But yeah.
So what's killing them off? Is it, again, like habitat destruction? Or is it, like you mentioned disease? So.
Yeah, disease is definitely a big player. I'm not too sure. I suppose habitat destruction, very interesting.
Yeah, something I'll probably be looking into later. That could actually be really fun.
Yeah, fun for an apocalyptic film, perhaps.
There are movies, I don't know if you've heard of it, there is this movie called, I think it's called Tire or Wheel.
Okay.
No, Rubber. And it's it's a spoof comedy horror where a tire, like a generic car tire, just rolls continuously throughout the movie on its own accord, bouncing from city to city.
Yep.
And anyone it encounters, it kills. Like, it decapitates them or something. I have no idea. I've not seen this. I've seen enough trailers when it got released, and it was just the most bizarre concept of it. I mean, if they've got scale for that and Sharknado, they can definitely pop out some kind of bee horror for bee horror movies.
But see, that's great.
The pun's already there.
Actually, I think the Disney, was it Disney or DreamWorks? I'm not sure, but it was the bee movie. Like, I think pollination and all that features quite heavily.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming onto the show. Really appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, fair.
So if any listeners enjoyed the show, please like us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. Share us with your friends and family. If you yourself or you happen to know anyone who wish would come to feature on the show, please encourage them to get in touch with us. You can get in touch via our email at vaguecomments@gmail.com or on our website at www.vaguelyaccurate.com. There's a form on there. Just fill it out. It takes 2 minutes and we can reply usually within the day. As always, a shout out to ACE Podcast Network. They are a great bunch of guys who are doing a lot to support us and many other shows through advice, sharing of cohort listeners, and even for new and upcoming shows. If you have an idea, get in contact with ACE Podcast and I'm sure they can offer the advice and help you on your way. So I suppose that's all for today, but thank you very much and we'll hear from you soon. Take care. Bye.